Hello, my name is Ira Pande. I'm one of the co-directors of the Jaipur Literature Festival, and I'm here to encourage you to turn on the Brave New World. This is the Jaipur in Exile online digital festival. We have an extraordinary array of writers. There are not many positive things coming out of this terrible pandemic, but one positive thing is that all the writers who've ever wanted to Jaipur, who for one reason or another weren't able to make it, have all said yes. And we have writers such as Robert McFarlane, Peter Carey, Alain de Botton, Emma Duval, writers we have longed to bring to you before, who've been too busy or unable to make the journey, who are now going to make it digitally online to a screen near you. So lock down, log in.
On behalf of Namita Gokhale, William Dalrymple, and all my colleagues at Teamwork Arts, welcome back to JLF's Brave New World. Those of you who missed our earlier sessions, including the outstanding Margaret Atwood, Piku Iyer, Siddharth Mukherjee, Tina Brown, Peter Carey, Jhumpa Lahiri, Chinmay Tumbe, Prayag Akbar, Edmund de Waal, Alain de Botton, and many others. You can catch these on our Facebook page, JLF Litfest, and on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF. To tell you more about the stellar list of writers we have lined up for you in the coming weeks, please welcome festival directors Namita Gokhale and William Dalrymple.
Dear friends of literature, friends of JLF, we are delighted at the response from all of you to our first digital session some days ago. And we return again today with more programming which looks at the world around us. The brave new world we are trying to understand and to access. Do tune in, do link in, do engage, do comment as we celebrate books, dialogues, and literature.
Hello, my name is William Dalrymple. I'm one of the co-directors of the Jaipur Literature Festival, and I'm here to encourage you to turn on for Brave New World. This is the Jaipur in Exile online digital festival. We have an extraordinary array of writers. There are not many positive things coming out of this terrible pandemic, but one positive thing is that all the writers we've ever wanted at Jaipur, who for one reason or another weren't able to make it so far, have all said yes. And we have writers such as Robert McFarlane, Peter Carey, Alain de Botton, Emma Duval, writers we have longed to bring to you before, who've been too busy or unable to make the journey, who are now going to make it digitally online to a screen near you. So lock down, log in, and join us, please, for Brave New World.
Thank you, Namita. Thank you, William. Our first session today on JLF Brave New World is Shubha Mudgal, of Words and Music. Acclaimed vocalist and writer Shubha Mudgal tells us how she invokes words and song to communicate the joy of Indian classical music. In conversation with writer and translator Ira Pande, she discusses the interconnectedness of the art and their crucial role in our disturbing times. Shubha Mudgal has specialized in the Hindustani classical genres of Khayal and Thumri Dadra. She's the recipient of several national and international awards, with deep roots in the magical and diverse world of Indian music. She's been a student, performer, teacher, composer, and columnist for several decades. Her debut collection of short stories revolves around the music that has nurtured and helped find her voice. Shubha Mudgal is in conversation with Ira Pande. Ira Pande is a writer and translator. She's translated several books from Hindi into English and has been awarded the Crossword and Sahitya Academy Translation Prize for her translation of Manohar Sham Joshi's Tata Professor in 2009 and 2010, respectively. She is currently finishing a translation of her mother, Shivani's memoir of Shantiniketan titled Amader Shantiniketan. Remember, please do comment and ask questions by typing it into the comment section. Do follow our handles, JLF Litfest, on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to get notified on the upcoming sessions. In case any of you drop off due to bandwidth issues or we freeze, we promise we'll be back, so hang in there, or you can watch the recorded session on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF. Ladies and gentlemen, Shubha Mudgal of Words and Music. Shubhaji, welcome. I think we've already had a bandwidth issue, and I think unfortunately, Ira Pande hasn't been able to join on. So, till she comes, I'm going to engage you in conversation. And I wanted to check, you've always been fascinated as much with music as the written word. I remember almost 20 years ago, in one of the first concerts that we were able to do together, you were in conversation and you looked at Mira's music, but you looked at it from both sides, from the text as well as the music side. Tell us about how and what inspired you to do that.
Well, in a sense, I've learned from people. I've learned music from very eminent gurus who have always had an interest in literature and who were also what you call Vagyakars. That means people who compose and write the song text, the lyrics themselves. So whether it is Pandit Ramashray Jhaji, for whom I learned from for several decades, or whether it was Naina Devi ji, who was such a wonderful connoisseur of Urdu poetry, of Braj Bhasha poetry, or whether it was Pandit Jitendra Abhisheki or Pandit Kumar Gandharv, or Pandit Vinay Chandra Modgale, all of them had deep roots and a deep passion for literature as well. And remember that also my home I was brought up by parents who taught literature. So it's only natural that I should want to know more about literature as much as I want to know more about music. So thank you for this opportunity to talk about both.
Cuckold, again, I'm just going back to that, the beginning in many ways. Cuckold was such a seminal work of its time because it examined Kiran Nagarkar's work, which examined perhaps what the husband, the king, Mirabai's husband, was feeling, being rejected for the mother, for the other man. And in the Indian music tradition, of course, everything is sung as a pain to Mirabai. So, how did you come up with that particular context?
I've like every student of music, I've learned my fair share of Mirabai bhajans and loved them. Listened to many Mirabai bhajans by the great singers, whether it was Srimati M.S. Subbalakshmi or Lata ji or so many others. But once at an airport, I picked up a copy of Cuckold by Kiran Nagarkar, and I read. And I said, my goodness, what an amazing book this is. And then I had the temerity to get in touch with him and request him to consider doing a project with me where he would read extracts from his book, which I had already edited out. And I don't know how I found the strength to ask him that. And he very kindly agreed. So then Anish really created a kind of a soundscape where I would sing and each of the instruments. We didn't really wait for me to finish singing or for him to finish reading, but it was really put together as an unorthodox approach to interpreting Mirabai's poetry, and that's how we worked on that project.
Thank you, Shubha. I think we can welcome Ira Pande. She's back with us. Ira, fantastic. Can you hear me?
Namaste,
Oh,
Ravi.
I am handing it over to you. And remember, I'll be only a little way away from you should anything happen. Over to you, Ira.
I'm technologically challenged. Shubha, it's wonderful to talk to you and carry on a conversation about something which is very dear to you, which is helping people in times of stress. I mean, whether it's through your music, and I wanted to talk a little about this new thing that you launched to help people who are, not very well off but connected with music, accompanists who have no source of income other than this. And now that we are in this terrible situation, we have to all understand how closely we are all interconnected, whether it is the plastic arts or the performing arts or writers and publishers, whoever. And so tell us a little about this great campaign that you launched and how you managed to raise money and what you plan to do in the future about this before we carry on about your music.
Well, Iradi, I mean, Namita and William have named this the Brave New World series, but actually, we are all in a very bewildered state. We're a bewildered new world who doesn't know where we are going, what's going to happen to us next, and several artist friends and friends who work with the arts. In fact, six of us. There was Anish, Samira Iyengar, who has worked a lot with theatre, Rahul Vora, who is an actor and a producer, Mona Irani, who was a casting director, and Arundhati Ghosh, who works a lot with the arts and also heads India Foundation for the Arts. But all of us, in our individual capacities, we thought, let's get together and try and raise some funds, particularly for artists who may not have saved up and may have meager resources to tide over the next, I don't know how many months, And so we thought of a scheme where we could hopefully collect enough funds to give 100 people, 100 artists, and this means musicians, dancers, theater workers, even people who make instruments, sort of ancillary professions as well. We thought if we could collect enough money to give them 5,000 rupees a month for the next 6 months, so from May to October, which would perhaps really provide just a tiny bit of help. Because, as you know, the summer months are very lean months for artists, as are the monsoon months. And to our amazement and to our delight, we were really lucky that we raised not only the 35 lakhs that we had started out by wanting to raise, but we actually raised almost 42 lakhs,
Wow.
thanks to the generosity of each donor, and also to the generosity of HCL, which really helped us with the funds. And we will now be able to help 132 artists and their families for these 6 months.
Wonderful. We'll come back to Corona and the changed world post Corona. But I want to start with you as a little girl because that is how I remember you. We grew up, yes, we grew up seeing you and your little sister. Your mother was the warden of our hostel, and not just that, she and Skansab, your father, were my teachers. And so we shared a very warm, wonderful relation with them. And I remember you because you had large eyes, a very solemn face, two thick plaits, and I remember you in a frock. I mean, strange as it may seem. But I remember you were learning Kathak at that point, Shubha. So when
Yes.
and how did, because I know Jayavi and your grandmother and that whole family, actually, your parents, both of them on either side, were very deeply connected with classical music and dance and folk music and all that. So when did your interest in music start and how did it continue?
I mean, I was always interested in music, and I was always sort of, I had a good oral memory, and I could memorize songs, and my mother would teach me various compositions. But my formal talim in classical music only started when I was a teenager, when I was about 17 years old. And my mother felt that it was a good idea for me not to just learn Kathak, but also look at the art of Thumri, which means that I would have to train as a vocalist as well. And in the past, the great exponents of Thumri would be dancers as well as singers. So she said that it was a good idea for me to try and train formally in Hindustani classical music. And that's how she took me to Pandit Ram Ashray Jhaji, who was also teaching and was the head of the Department of Music at the Allahabad University at the time. And she requested him to give me talim, and I was very fortunate that I was accepted as his disciple, and that's how my journey with vocal music started. I think we have a problem with Iradi's connection, and I'm going to wait. Yeah.
Shubhaji, sorry, this is sort of like a fractured conversation between two interlocutors at the same time, but just taking on from what
Sonja, you have to stop calling me Shubha ji. Huh? You've called me Shubha for too long.
a formal interview, we must be
I
formal.
shall call you Sonjoy ji also.
No, but going back to what we were talking about, the writing and the music, the Indian classical tradition or the Indian tradition of music is not a notation tradition. It's learned from guru to shishya and so on and so forth. Tell us a little bit about that, and because it's so different from the Western tradition, and a lot of people in the West are always amazed that you don't follow a sheet of music or notation. You actually do it in many ways from the heart and by learning year after year after year. Tell us a little bit of how the tradition came to being and what was your own experience in this tradition.
You're right that we don't really follow a notation always, because this system of music relies on elaboration, on improvising, spontaneous elaboration. So many of the pieces that we learn have to be internalized. What we learn about Ragi has to be internalized, but at the same time, several forms of notation do exist, and they have been very helpful in our being able to reconstruct compositions, bandishes that we perhaps were not taught. So it isn't as if there is no notation for Hindustani classical music. In fact, there are several kinds, and the two main varieties are the Bhatkhande kind of notation, and there is the Vishnu Digambar Paluskar notation. These are used very commonly. However, the enunciation of swaras in each rag, which are very specific to a particular rag, those really are things which can't be notated and haven't been notated so far. And so the idea of sitting before a guru and engaging in what was described once as Sina Basina Talim, that means you were so close to the guru that you were really sitting close to him or her and hearing each inflection, each nuance of how every swar in a rag is used. And that was considered the hallmark of this great tradition of uh, uh, passing on knowledge. Today, that very tradition has been challenged by this lockdown, and so we're all, using the online platform to stay in touch with our students, because we can't possibly not meet them for so long, and we're learning how to adapt. So from Basina, it's become laptop to laptop, or phone to phone talim that we are giving today. But really, it involves going to the guru on many occasions, regularly, without having a fixed duration for the class, and really spending a lot of time not only learning ragdari, not only learning compositions, but also learning about the ethos of this entire system. How do you greet a senior musician if they walk in the middle of your performance? Do you stop? How do you acknowledge them? How do you meet seniors? How do you look after tanpuras? All of this is taught in this wonderful way that we had of transmitting knowledge from the guru to the disciple, and which we will now have to readapt to in current times.
But in recent times, but in terms of the contemporary times, hasn't that already sort of changed? Because you know, in your case, or in the case of so many musicians who stayed with their gurus and learned hour after hour, day after day, month after month, year after year, before they even did their first solo recital. Of course, they accompanied their gurus after a particular point of time. But in today's sort of era of instant Maggie noodles or instant coffee, that had already sort of left us, and you had musicians doing much shorter courses with their gurus, perhaps shopping around and going from one guru. Has there been has that transition already happened, and has that now been exaggerated by this particular lockdown?
Well, as you said, I mean, the emergence of institutionalized training, the idea that music can be taught at either a school exclusively for the teaching of music, or even in let's say, in in um, in classes, the intuition classes that you go to, all of that has certainly emerged. But somebody stopped my video for some reason. Maybe they can take that off. I haven't.
I
But
have stopped the video because it was unstable. I'll bring it back on. Don't worry. Just carry on.
okay, so the idea of institutionalized training has certainly caught on, and you can do an MA in music, you can do a BA in music, you can do diploma courses in music. But at the same time, there are several people and several institutions which lay great store by Gharanedar Talim. And many musicians even today prefer to stay with one guru or with one gharana. So I think that those options were there earlier and are there even now and are emerging with new formats as well.
You talked about Gharane that Ira, you back with us?
I am, but I'm losing the thread of your conversation. So carry on with what you were saying.
I was just going to ask her to tell us a little bit more about the Gharana traditions, because again, these are schools of music, and many people don't quite understand how the Gharanas and what they mean, and what's the difference between one and the other. So I was asking Shubha to
So,
elaborate on that. But
Shubha
once
can
she finishes that, over to you.
continue my conversation. Yeah.
But basically, the gharanas emerged from families of hereditary musicians who, one of whom usually was a path breaker and established a new style, and was then followed by generations of people either from the family or generations of disciples who followed the same singing style. In many cases, there was a major gharana, but then tributaries, a kind of sub gharanas would also emerge, and they really contributed towards illustrating the immense diversity of perspective and approach that exists in the system of Hindustani classical music. Needless to say, in any creative art, you can't be constrained, and you can't be kept captive within any kind of parameters. So many people who belonged to a gharana also established their own great singing styles. So, for example, Pandit Bhimsen Joshi ji and Srimati Gangubai Hangal learned from the same guru, but their singing styles, while retaining a certain common stylistic features, they also sounded so different. They were such different personalities, both personalities on stage as well as musical personalities. So I think the tradition really gives you the freedom to stay within a certain style and yet be yourself, find your own voice if you're interested in doing that.
Ira, are you with us? I think we may well have lost her. This is turning out to be quite interesting, if nothing else. Uh, Shubha, moving on from the Gharana tradition, how do you see, COVID is here to stay, and we know that. And we also know that for artists and artisans and people in the cultural sector, uh, if they don't perform, or if they don't create a wear, and if they don't sell it, they don't eat. I mean, it's as simple as that. We don't come from a secure industry with access to finance and all of this. We depend on performances. We depend on people buying tickets or booking artists to perform. How do you see this sort of panning out over the next few months? Because COVID is here to stay. It's not going anyplace.
Well, I would love to wish it away, but I know I can't. I would be fooling myself if I said it's going to leave in a hurry. But at the same time, I also think, and I take great strength from the fact that artists across generations have really shown great, their ability to adapt and strategize has been amazing. And so they've dealt with new formats, they've grappled with new formats so wonderfully and come up with solutions that I'm hoping that perhaps all of us will put our heads together, and not just artists but also people who present the arts like you do so often, and will come up with solutions where the online platform can be used to its fullest advantage. Like any other format, it's going to have its limitations as well as its strengths. And we have to find out how to be able to present, in particular, Indian music in all its diversity on this new platform. So, right now, of course, during the lockdown, it's not possible to experiment with audio engineers advising us on what kind of microphones to use, what kind of web cameras to use. But there's a lot of information that we need to share with each other. Also, presentation formats. While you don't have the great, the amazing sight of thousands of people listening to you or hundreds of people listening to you, you know that you're actually going live into the homes of so many listeners. And I think we need to adapt to that and perhaps look at presentation formats which are maybe short and yet say a lot. So I think we all need to get put on our creative hats and also consult with experts in the field and come up with solutions. And I don't doubt that we will come up with solutions.
Talking about solutions, one of the things that you and Anish have been doing pretty much from the beginning, and I used Cuckold in the beginning of this conversation as an example, is where you've never feared about venturing outside what used to be a very firm line between the way classical music can be performed and the way that it's perceived today. You actually went out, and in many ways, you've sort of been the pioneer to what we can look at contemporary in the contemporary classical genre. You also were quite fearless and did other work. Of course, you didn't perform it live, but you did work in the more popular genre. Tell us a little bit about how you sort of gathered that thing and said, okay, let me explore and let me go out as it should be. But it must have been difficult with the kind of peer pressure, perhaps, that you would have got.
Well, I think I was given the opportunity by friends who were working in popular music. My first attempt to record popular music came with an album called Ali More Angna in 1996. And Jawahar Vatal, who had worked with a lot of, very, very well-known indie pop stars from Baba Sehgal to Daler Mehndi, he was the one who actually invited me to sing this, to record for this album. And Sanjoy, it's interesting when I look back. Nobody thought of what would happen to the music of that album after it was launched. So normally when an album is launched, there's a launch, and then there are gigs to promote that album. In the past, there were radio would come in, and radio would launch new singles and new tracks. Nobody thought of what would happen to Ali Moriana after it was launched. So neither did I have a band. I actually recorded Ali More Angna with sessions musicians who came to the studio, many of whom I didn't meet. And nobody thought of what of the life of Ali More Angna after it was launched. So I was in this unique position of everybody accusing me of and saying that, oh, Shubha Mudgal has let down the world of classical music, sold herself to popular music and to commercial art, and yet I didn't have a single gig after that album was launched. So I think for an artist, it's necessary to have that sense of curiosity, and then be ready for the brickbats as well as some acclaim if it comes their way. Otherwise, I think the experience in itself was enough for me to say that I would repeat it again if I were asked again.
I would love to take that and move on to some of the other work that you've been doing in the space of rights, etc. But I know that we may have only 5 minutes before we open up to question and answer. So let me move on to the book, Shubha. How did the book come about?
The book was actually quite a surprise, and I never really set out to write a book, and I never thought I would write fiction. But I had been writing a column on music for many years for a publication. And then I worked with Sunil Shanbag. Anish and I worked with Sunil Shanbag on a production called Stories in a Song, where we basically asked Sunil whether we could possibly, present episodes on different forms of music, and episodes that came from fiction as well as those that we had read about in academic works about music making. And that's how Stories in a Song featured actors who also performed and sang on stage. So it was a bit like a musical, but the actors were amazing. They sang Thumri, they sang Qawwali, they sang Ghazal, they sang Kajri, they even sang Hindustani airs. And so it was quite an amazing production, and it became very popular. And then I thought, maybe we can do another Stories in a Song part 2. And I thought perhaps this one could be more nuanced, and each episode could be longer and present a more complex picture, both musically as well as theatrically. And I started writing this storyline, and I started fleshing out the characters, basically to present to Sunil to say, do you think this could be worked on? Well, that sort of left, it just never turned into a theater piece. But later I showed it to Kanishka Gupta of Writer's Side, and he said, do you have any more of these stories? And I felt so enthused. And I said, well, I have them in my head. I haven't written them down as yet. And then he encouraged me to write them. And of course, Anish was always there and who would laugh at all my stories and say, yeah, yeah, go ahead, go ahead. And so that's how Miss Sargam came to be. And then Kanishka found me a wonderful publisher in Ravi Singh of Speaking Tiger. And that's how the book was published.
And thank you for bringing it to the Jaipur Literature Festival earlier this year
Thank
and
you.
talking it. It's a beautiful book. So we've got a number of questions. Of course, I still have many questions to ask. A few romance with Anish, the whole rights issue, but maybe we'll hold that for a second and take some of the questions from the audience. So Shantanu Maji asks, great music is always about great poetry wrapped in a lilting, soulful tune. Do words matter though? Because one often remembers a tune long after the word. Sorry, this is by Sachdev Ramakrishna.
Well, I think in a vocal form like, let's say, Khayal or Thumri Dadra, words do matter and they matter in more than one way. One is the actual essence of the lyrics, but it's also the phonetic quality of each of the words. So when you say dhoom dham and you use the heaviness, the phonetic heaviness of that sound, when you say dhoom dham, say ai badariya, then the very nature of that sound, dhoom dham, really brings an added color into that. And of course, what the lyrics are saying actually guide you in many forms like Tumri, where actually your elaboration rests on the Sahitya. It's steered by the Sahitya. You take it forward with the Sahitya. So yes, words do matter. Both has sounds and both has actual meaning. And not just meaning on the top layer, on the surface layer, but very often it has more. I mean, there is a hidden meaning. There are many hidden meanings which you can look for in the song text.
Shantanu Maji asks, how does one reach out to an international audience which has no understanding of, let's say, nuances of Karibauli, for example, when one is performing a popular form as Thumri these days?
I really believe in the power of music and its ability to communicate, whether or not you understand the language. It is a language. It is a complete language on its own. So why worry about? I mean, you can give program notes. You can share some information with your audience if you wish to, and if they are willing to go. To listen to what you're saying about that. But otherwise, I really believe the music says it all, and it conveys, it communicates if it's put forth. I mean, that's how so many forms of music are so popular outside India today, and vice versa. I mean, very often you wonder whether Drupad will be heard only in France now, because perhaps there are more concerts of Drupad in outside India than there are in India. And similarly, um, when a non-Indian artist who presents an entirely different kind of music with a different system of music comes to India, so many people go and listen. So I really do believe in the power of music and its ability to communicate without the usual means of communication.
Ela asks, how or why did vocals take over in your younger years as you initially?
How did I'm sorry, I didn't hear that question.
How or why did vocals take over in your younger years, given that you trained as a classical dancer?
Once I started learning vocal music, it was somehow I became so obsessed, and so I was just so taken up with all that I could discover, and I was discovering, and my gurus were helping me discover and showing me, that I felt completely consumed by the need to learn vocal music. And that has stayed with me, the excitement of that, the wonderful world of vocal music, the wonderful world of actually sound and the voice, the human voice, has really fascinated me ever since. And I think the credit for that goes first to my parents for giving me the opportunity to learn, and then my wonderful gurus who have so generously continued to teach me, despite the fact that I was a very bad student and a very disobedient student very often.
Natasha Jog asks, what is a good way to introduce children to Hindustani classical music? There are so many influences these days, but this is one area that is difficult for many to find a window into.
I think that's a great question, and I think perhaps one of the things that could help in introducing children to classical music would be if you could expose them to concerts, which of course now is not going to happen in the physical space for a long time, but perhaps just if the parents would listen at home along with all other forms of music that the children prefer. I think it would be good to expose children to all kinds of music, including classical music, not to insist that this is the best and the only form of music that you should learn. I think they should be allowed to make a choice as they do in any other subject for any other subject. And I think that would be the best way. Also, perhaps teaching them not only as performers. I think a lot of our teaching is geared towards performance, but the concepts that behind the system, the idea of elaboration, and if we can make games, if we can create resources around those, I think it would be great fun, not only for children to learn classical music, but for teachers to discover how to teach it too. I mean, we would learn a lot as teachers if we got this opportunity to build new resources, new games to teach children classical music.
So, two questions I'm going to club into one. One is by Raghav Pasricha, who says, if you had to curate music in times of COVID, what would you present? And the other from Joginder Tulli, who says, which rag is your favorite, ma'am?
I really don't have one favorite rag, but as I've said on many occasions, my guru used to say that there are certain foundation rags, like for example Kalyan or Yaman or Bhairav, which we are taught right when we start in our first talim sessions. We are taught these rags, either Bhairav or Kalyan. And I think those rags really teach you, show you the way forward, and they remain with you. So in a sense, I'm most familiar with the foundation rags because I spent the longest time with them. So I won't give a single answer to that, single name of a rag for that answer. And for Raghav, I'd say that, COVID has made us all very anxious, has made us very tense, but has also made us hope, and has also given us a sense of, of the transience of everything. I mean, in a pandemic, I'm talking to you today. If I were to get infected, who knows what would happen next? So I think what I would do is to celebrate life. I would curate something which celebrates life in all its diversity. It would have pieces with a great sense of melancholy and depression. It would also have moments of great joy, and I know that Indian music is full of so many pieces that it would be an absolute pleasure to curate the COVID concerts.
We've got Vidya Mani, who says, in these times when a lot of music has gone online and made available for free, how do we secure artists' rights?
We need to, I mean, first of all, the artist has to decide what he or she wants to do with that music. Perhaps they could decide how much of their music they want to give away for free. For example, if you have a recording of an entire concert, then you could perhaps give away one track as a special gift to your admirers and followers. And for the rest of the concert, maybe a fee has to be established. If you want to have a certain fee structure, you can dictate that, or you can say donate whatever you like. And above all, you also need to think about the accompanying musicians, the band, the ensemble, the people who recorded, the people who have contributed to the success of your concert, and look after all of them and discuss with them how they would like to share their this sort of ensemble work that was put together. So I think it's only through discussion that we'll be able to decide how to really monetize music in this COVID era, and how perhaps to make it viable for artists to continue making the art that they do.
Akshay Shetty asks a question which perhaps has been asked through millennium. At a time when musicians derive most of their patronage from government funds, how can they manage to still remain political?
Like art, I believe the political will cannot be contained. You have to say at some point of time, nobody can force you to say what you believe in and what you don't believe in. And so I think for an artist, it is very necessary not only to be political, but also be fiercely independently political and not controlled by any one person or any one ideology. I think art is a complete it's really a complete, for me it's my religion as well as my politics, and what my art tells me if this is correct or this is not correct. And I could make mistakes in those choices also. I'm not saying I'm always correct, but I must have the independence. And I think artists in the past have shown us that. So I really think that government patronage, I mean, even in this era, in this situation, we are still wondering what the government is going to do about art and culture. And I believe schemes are being worked upon, but they need to be there and very soon, because otherwise, uh, it's almost as if art has become synonymous with entertainment, and anything that entertains might survive. But all art is not entertaining, and all art must survive, however difficult the survival must be. But and I think governments need to work on that as well. And I know that, Shanjoy, you are working on that, but we are also working on a kind of a policy paper which we should soon be ready to share. My friends, all of us who were together for Ada, we've been working on something, and I hope to share it soon.
Well, as you know, governments pay lip service to art and tradition. It's always India's most ancient art form, and and that's where it ends. There's very rarely have we seen money that follows this need or want to establish India's hegemony in the world through its art.
Yep.
Sudeep
Yep.
Sen, the poet, he asks, where does music and writing intersect for you?
Sudeep ji, thank you for listening in. Um, you know, well, let me share with you that for a long time I've wanted to write my own lyrics, and I have written some lyrics for popular music. But my one big dream is to write my own bandishes, the text for my own bandishes. So far, I've not been able to find my voice there, and I keep trying by studying literature from the past to learn from the many ways in which people have expressed themselves. But when I write my own bandish, I don't want to be writing either in Braj Bhasha or in Awadhi, because these are not the dialects that I speak every day. I want to write in today's Hindi, and I want to write about issues that bother me. Akshay, talked about politics. I want to write about that as well, and I want my music and my bandishes to have that element of my experience in today's world. And I hope that someday I will be able to achieve that. If not, I'll keep trying.
So, two quick questions. I can't give you, there are many that's streaming in, but two quick ones. The first is it difficult to grasp classical music if starting to learn late? Even if you've got basic training in other forms of music? This is Nandini Chaudhary. And Joginder Tully says, ma'am, nation wants to know, who is Miss Sargam?
Miss Sargam is the quintessential artist, Jogendraji. She who, she could very well have been a man and it could have been Master Sargam, but she is Miss Sargam for now. And she is the quintessential artist who is able to adapt, who is able to reinvent herself for any circumstance, for changed circumstances. So she's really an artist to the very core of her being. And what was the other question, Sanjay, that you
The
asked?
other, can you start learning Hindustani classical quite late? She's obviously a person who's done a lot of stuff. She's got training in other music, but she's asking, can you pick up classical music later in life?
Well, I started fairly late. Normally, people start learning when they're 4 or 5 or 6. I started my formal talim when I was 17 years old, and that's unusually late. But I think when adults, or when you start learning at a later stage in your life, you're already highly motivated. You're going to learn not because granny, mummy, daddy have asked you to go and learn, and because they think it's a good hobby for you to be engaged with. You come with your own motivation, and I think that has its own strengths. So if you're motivated, any age is good to start learning.
I have to wrap up, but Mani Suri says, can you sing something to uplift the spirits of all during the stressful time? And you have another similar um, a question, which is from Manish Thapam, who says, ma'am, few lines of Ali More Angana. So, Shivaji, just closing, if you would like to share a little bit of music with us, and we will close the episode.
So somebody asked for Ali Moriangna, so I'll just sing a few lines of that. इश्क में तेरे जोगन बन गई, इश्क में तेरे जोगन बन गई, दिल मेरा डोले रे है, छम छम बोले है पायलिया, मोरी पायलिया रे. And I don't have payelia right now.
Shubhaji, thank you so much for this incredible conversation. We're so sorry to have missed Ira, and I had to step in for her. Ira Pande, thank you so much for trying to valiantly join us from wherever you are. I know the bandwidth issues continue to exist. More and more people keep coming on, but thank you all for watching and being such a great audience. I'm sorry I couldn't take all the questions, but we do try and take as many as we can. Please remember to tune in at 9 p.m. for our next session, What Lucretius Taught Us About Pandemics. Stephen Greenblatt in conversation with Tom Holland. In his philosophical masterpiece on the nature of things, written around 50 BC, Lucretius devoted particular attention to pandemics. Here, the Pulitzer Prize winning professor of English at Harvard talks to writer, historian, and translator of Lucretius, Tom Holland, about what the Roman sage can tell us about disease and lockdown. For those of you who are willing to stay logged on, we have an extract from the Jaipur Music Stage archives. Gifted with a radiant personality and a joyous spirit, Chabi Sabha managed to merge breathmaking and beat making with tradition easily and open heartedly. If there was a disconnect in an Algerian Jew plugging into Hindu and Sufi Muslim spirituality, or in the layering ragas with heavy beats, Chabi Sabha didn't see it. He used music to build the kind of world that he wanted to live in, and in doing so, became godfather and mentor to generations of artists and listeners who found common ground on the dance floor. Chabi was a Jaipur music stage favorite till he passed away in 2013. Here's a tribute concert performed by medieval pundits Karsh Kale, Gods Roberts, and Ajay Prasanna from the Jaipur Music Stage archives. Enjoy it.